Good evening. I hope you're doing well this evening and hope you're ready to join in with our study. We're continuing our study in evidences, particularly on the question of creation versus evolution. This is oriented toward the 9th and 10th grade classes at Pepper Road, but of course, anybody and everybody is welcome and invited to join in with the study. And hopefully it will be beneficial to everybody who joins in and studies with us. We are speaking from the Word of God, and we are also using this book, Unraveling Evolution by Joshua Gertler. It's a great book and a lot of great material in it, and I'm bringing in some material that is not found in the book. So with all that together, and of course relying primarily on God's Word, what He has revealed to us, hopefully we can come to a better understanding of who God is, His power, His eternal purpose for us, and His powerful creation. And with that, we will go ahead and begin our study. We're in our fourth study, class number 4, but we are in lesson 6 in the Unraveling Evolution book. We started this on Wednesday night. We continue it, and Lord willing, we'll complete it in this study, lesson 6. So what we want to do tonight, we're going to start with Genesis chapter 1, and that's where it all begins. This is a passage that very clearly points out that God created everything, and that God created everything to reproduce after its kind. This is a refutation of evolution right there in the very first chapter of the first book of God's revelation. Everything reproduces after its kind. It does not evolve into a different kind. 10 times in Genesis chapter 1, God reveals to us that He created everything to reproduce after its kind. Plants and animals, and of course people, reproduce after their kind. Now within limits, there is variation possible. God has designed His creation to have some variation within the limits of those kinds. But beyond those limits, variation cannot go. When God created, He saw everything that He had made, and behold, indeed, it was very good. We briefly talked about natural selection and mutation in our last lesson. We want to continue that a little bit. And we touched on natural selection in dogs. Dogs are a great example of how creation works and how the limits of natural selection works, or even artificial selection. So let's talk about natural selection in dogs. For example, here we have a male dog and a female dog, and they both have the genes in their DNA for long fur and short fur. That's what the L and S stand for. Long fur genes and short fur genes. And they both have those genes in their bodies. And those are expressed in these particular dogs by medium length fur. Okay? Well, these two dogs meet, and they fall in love, and they get married, and they decide, you know what? We want to have kids. So they start a family. And in their first litter, they have 3 puppies. And these puppies, the first one has genes, only the genes for short fur. It took the short fur genes from the father and from the mother, and that was expressed in short fur for that particular puppy. Then the other one on the other side has only the genes for long fur, long fur genes. So that, of course, would be expressed in long fur. And then the other one has the genes for both long and short fur. That is the more common outcome of this type of parentage, about 50%. The others would be about 25% each. So here we have the one puppy that has medium fur, one has short fur, and one has long fur. Well, let's say there was an ice age, and it was very, very frigid, very cold. Which one of these dogs, when they grow up, do you think would have the best chance for survival in a very, very cold environment of an ice age? Well, it would obviously be the one with the long fur. Okay, so our poor little short fur and medium fur dogs died off. I know it's sad, but we have natural selection taking place. And so we have one dog left, and he has long fur. Well, let's say this is a male. Well, we have a female come along, and she also has long fur and has only the genes for long fur. Well, let's say this male dog and this female dog meet, and they fall in love and get married and decide to have kids. What length fur will their babies have? Will their puppies have? Only long fur. Because what happened to the short fur genes? It died off. There were no, remember this one only had the genes for long fur. So the short fur genes have died off. It doesn't exist anymore in this strain of dogs, you might say. So here we have only long fur genes. So these dogs will only have long fur. So that is how a very simplistic version of how natural selection takes place in dogs. Okay, we talked about the mechanisms of evolution. So we have natural selection that we just talked about, but we also have, according to evolutionists, mutation, according to neo-Darwinism, neo meaning new. So neo-Darwinism brings in mutation to the mix because they realized that natural selection alone could not account for new features of animals, could not account for new information. So they had to come up with plan B, which was mutation. Now, a mutation in a gene. Now, what do you think of when you think of mutation? What do you think of when you think of the word mutant? A mutant, is that a good thing? No, that's not a good thing. That's a bad thing. So a mutation is generally a bad thing. Okay, apologize for that. Had a little bit of a glitch. But here we go again. So mutation is a structural change in a gene. A structural change, so it must be something new, not just a reordering of what already exists. So that is what a mutation is, something that changes the DNA or changes the gene and changes it profoundly or dramatically, but it must be something new, not just a changing of or reordering of what already exists. And as we said the other night, Ernst Mayr says it must not be forgotten that mutation is the ultimate source of all genetic variation found in natural populations and the only new material available for natural selection to work on. This is all we can come up with. This is all we got, says evolutionists, is mutation. So let's look into mutations and find out what they are using, what they have come up with as their mechanism for evolution. Well, we find when we study mutation, we find that they are almost always harmful. And I use the word almost very generously there, because practically zero have ever been found to be beneficial. Mutations are really assaults on the organism's central being, its basic capacity to be a living thing, C.P. Martin said. So a mutation is an assault on the living thing. All right, let's talk about information. We've talked about information quite a bit in this class already. And we're talking about the information in DNA. So let's think about this question. What DNA between these two would contain more information? The DNA in an amoeba, which of course is a one-celled organism, or the DNA in a horse? Very simple question. It's not a trick question. Obviously, the horse DNA would contain more information and quite a bit more information. So, follow-up question. For an amoeba or any one-celled organism to evolve into a horse, what would have to happen to the information in its DNA? The answer is it would have to increase, and it would have to increase dramatically. This is a problem for evolutionists. Dr. Lee Spetner says that all point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it, to reduce the genetic information. That's what happens when a mutation occurs in a gene. Genetic information is reduced and lost and not increased. So mutations are harmful. All right, back to our example of dogs. Let's talk about dogs, dog breeds, and how they come about. I believe there were only 2 dogs on the ark. First of all, God created only 2 dogs. But by the time of the flood, there were just 2 dogs that were taken on the ark. And they were probably something similar to the wolf kind. Very hardy, very strong, and very able to survive and live and hunt and reproduce and do very well in nature. But all the dog breeds that we talked about last class have come about by mutation. Now, this is what we talked about earlier, how that there is variation within kind. Within the dog kind, there is a tremendous amount of variation. If you think of all of the dog breeds that exist, what are they? They are dogs. So there's nothing new. They're just variations within the dog kind, and they come about by mutation. For instance, a short snout. You know, a wolf has a kind of a long snout. Well, somebody says, you know what? I think a short snout would look cute. So they start interbreeding, they start selectively breeding, and lo and behold, the snout gets shorter and shorter, and it looks cute. But it looks cute to people. This is not a good thing for the dog, because the dog still has all that skin that it had before, and now the skin is hanging, or it's loose, or it's wrinkled, and if not cleaned properly by human caretakers, that dog would have infections in that overlapping skin. So this is something that is brought about by mutation for the benefit of people, not for the benefit of the dog, because it's harmful. Mutations are harmful. Same thing with hair growth. As I talked about a wolf, or maybe a Labrador Retriever, Black Lab, they don't have to go to the breeder. I mean, to the groomer, do they? Because their hair does not continue to grow. But other dogs do, like our dog Snowball and Maggie, which are Bichon Frise, or a poodle. Dogs like that do have to go to the groomer, because they have lost the gene that stops hair growth. The gene that lets hair grow to a certain length and then stops, that gene has been lost in certain dog breeds like the Bichon. So our dog could not survive in the wild. There are other things um, that are brought about by mutation, like poodles, which are kind of the bottom of the barrel when it comes to dog breeds. They are very susceptible to disease because of all the mutations that have happened to them over the centuries by selective breeding by humans. So many of these dogs could not survive if left out in the wild, uh, like a dog who has lost the gene for stopping hair growth, like the Bichon Frise, like our dog. If you let it just run wild, it would end up just becoming a big hairball, and so it couldn't survive. It couldn't chase food and find food, so it would just perish. It would just die. Once again, these uh, mutations bring about these changes, and they're for human liking, not for the benefit of the dog, but they have human caretakers, so it's all right. Um, as long as the human takes care of the dog, then the dog can survive and do well. But in all of these cases, short snout and hair growth and the other mutations that cause all of these various breeds, what happens? The DNA, the information for reproducing that animal is not gained, it is lost. Just the opposite of what evolution requires. Evolution requires a tremendous amount, like we talked about the one-celled organism evolving into a horse, tremendous amount of information would have to be gained, which evolution has major problems with. Okay, well, what about mutations that are, quote, beneficial? Evolutionists like to talk about beneficial mutations. For instance, a wingless insect, like an insect that lives on an island. And an island, of course, is very windy there. So if an insect flies, it'll be caught by that wind and be tossed out into the sea and would die. So an insect who suffered several mutations and lost its wings cannot fly, so it can live. So this is a benefit, right? What about cave fish, fish who live in caves that are completely dark, no light whatsoever in the cave? Well, these fish have lost their eyes. I mean, they by mutation, their eyes have been bred out of the fish. They don't exist anymore. No eyeballs. So this is a benefit because if they had those eyes but they couldn't see because it was so dark, well, they would run into the rocks, run into all kinds of obstructions in the water, and bump their eyes and hurt themselves, hurt their eyes, and may even cause infection. So cavefish without eyes is a benefit, right? All right. What about number 3? Antibiotic resistance in bacteria. This is one of their favorites. They like to talk about antibiotic resistance. Have you ever heard about that? Antibiotic resistance? You may have been sick and your parent wanted to take you to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, we don't need to give antibiotics in this case, because if you give antibiotics too much, it can cause antibiotic resistance in bacteria. So they only want to give antibiotics when they have to. So let's talk about antibiotic resistance, how it comes about. Antibiotic resistance, that's a good thing, right? Because the bacterium has built up a resistance to the poison that kills it. That is the antibiotic. Antibiotic, of course, you take it, it's medicine, and it's designed to kill the bacteria that is causing your sickness. And therefore you get better. But if the bacteria has built up a resistance to that bacteria, to that antibiotic, then it won't be killed when you take the antibiotic. And so you'll stay sick but the bacteria will survive. So it's built up a resistance. So that helps it survive, right? Survival of the fittest. So this is evolution in action. So let's look how it actually happens. There is an enzyme in the bacteria that converts the antibiotic to poison. So here's a bacterium. It has this enzyme in itself. So it drinks in the antibiotic, and I guess because it just doesn't know any better, and it drinks in the antibiotic, and that enzyme converts that antibiotic into poison, and it dies. So that's how antibiotics work. But some bacteria have lost this enzyme due to mutations. So they don't have the enzyme that converts that antibiotic to poison, so therefore they're able to survive or live even though you've taken the antibiotic. So it lacks the ability to convert that antibiotic to poison, so it lives, it doesn't die. And that bacterium reproduces and eventually creates a strain of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So antibiotic resistance, so the medical researchers have to continue to do research to come up with new antibiotics that will work on those bacteria that have created or have developed that antibiotic resistance. Apologize again, having a bit of a technical difficulties here. But so the bacteria creates a strain of bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So that's a good thing, right? It allows it to live in even when it's attacked by the antibiotic. The bacteria is able to live, right? So this is evolution in action, according to them. Remember, we talked about evolution means that things get bigger and better and faster, stronger, smarter. So something that's able to live where it wasn't before is getting bigger and better, stronger, right? Just like the wingless insect and just like the eyeless cavefish, he survives not because he's getting bigger and better and stronger, but because his DNA has less information. This is not evolution in action. This is devolution. And that is a word. I didn't just make that up. It's the opposite of evolution. It's devolution. Dr. Lee Spetner again, we mentioned him a minute ago. He says, rather than saying the bacterium gained resistance to the antibiotic, it is more correct to say that it lost sensitivity to it. So it has lost information as opposed to gaining information. That's how antibiotic resistance comes about. It's not a good thing. It's not evolution in action. It's just the opposite. The Bible says in Job 12, beginning in verse 7, but now ask the beasts, and they will tell you, and the birds of the air, and they will tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, and the fish of the sea will explain to you. Who among all these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In whose hand is the life of every living thing and the breath of all mankind? So true. So we're talking about complexity and evolution and growth to bigger and better and more information. What about the complexity that does exist in the natural world, in the biological world? Evolutionist explanation for complexity. This has always been a problem for evolutionists to explain how everything is so complex and how it looks like it was designed. Because not only is it complex, but everything works together so beautifully and so well. How can that be explained by an evolutionist? Well, they have come up with what they think is a beautiful explanation. Evolutionist explanation for complexity. Evolution may be more intelligent than we thought. Oh, that's how. Evolution is able to learn from previous experience. So evolution is it's not random anymore. It's able to learn. It can think. It's able to learn from previous experience, which could provide a better explanation of how evolution by natural selection produces such apparently intelligent designs. They're only apparently intelligent. They may be intelligent, but it's not because of an intelligent designer. It's not because of God who created them. No, it's because evolution itself is intelligent. Conventionally, evolution being dependent on random variation has been considered blind, unable to exhibit such anticipation. If evolution can learn from experience and thus improve its own ability to evolve over time, this can demystify the awesomeness of the designs that evolution produces. So they know that the awesomeness of the design has been a problem. It's been mystified, that it is mysterious. They had no explanation for the design that exists in the biological world. But now that we've come up with this explanation, that is the ability for evolution to learn and to do things on purpose and not blindly and not randomly, but to plan and think, now evolution has a purpose. Natural selection can accumulate knowledge that enables it to evolve smarter. That's exciting because it explains why biological design appears to be so intelligent. Now, this is written by serious people. I tell you what, if I had to believe this in order to support my doctrine, I think I would give it up. That evolution has a mind. Evolution can think. Evolution is intelligent, and it can plan and think and cause and anticipate. It's not random anymore. They blame us, or they accuse us of acting on blind faith. I think evolutionists have faith. I think their faith puts our faith to shame. I believe our faith is based on the evidence, not just blindness, the evidence of God's word. Let's talk about odds, or the chances that evolution could actually happen. What are the chances that a complex organism could evolve to a higher degree of complexity? Now we're still on the horse. Remember, we mentioned the amoeba to the horse evolution. That's a tremendous amount of complexity. What are the odds that that could actually take place by mutation and natural selection? Is it 1 out of 100? 2 zeros? 1 out of 1,000? 3 zeros? What about 1 out of 1,000,000? 6 zeros? What 1 out of 1,000,000,000? 9 zeros? 1 out of 1,000,000,000,000? 12 zeros? No. The chances are 1 out of 1 with 3 million zeros after it. A naught is a zero. 1 out of 1 with 3 million zeros after it. And Julian Huxley, once again, one of the icons of evolution, says that would take 3 large books of about 500 pages each just to print that number. 1 with 3 million zeros after it. Those are the chances that this could actually take place. In other words, completely and profoundly and absolutely impossible. He says no one would bet on anything so improbable happening, and yet it has happened. It has happened thanks to the working of natural selection and the properties of living substance which makes natural selection inevitable. It's incredibly, profoundly, absolutely impossible, but it's happened. You talk about faith, you talk about blind faith, you talk about being determined to believe in something against all odds, against odds that are so great it takes 3 books of 500 pages each to even print it. I believe I'd give that up if that were my doctrine. All right, that's evolutionist faith. What about the Christian's faith? Know that the Lord, He is God. It is He who made us, and not we ourselves. Psalm 100, verse 3. As you do not know what is the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the womb of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes everything. Ecclesiastes 11, verse 5. That is the word of God. Here is the word of a man, A.W. Dicus, in the song, Our God, He is Alive, verse 3, one of my favorite verses of a hymn. Secure is life from mortal mind. God holds the germ within His hand. Though men may search, they cannot find, for God alone does understand. That's so true, that life, to understand life, God holds it within His hand. Though we may search and try to learn about life, we cannot find, for God alone understands. So that's the Christian's faith. We talked about the evolutionist faith, so let's talk about the contrast in their faith. The contrast of evolutionists versus creationists' faith. Evolutionists believe in the impossible, but with nothing to cause it but blind, naturalistic, random processes acting on their own to bring about all the design and complexity in the universe with no purpose. You are nothing but evolved pond scum. That's right. We came out of primordial soup that was in a pond, just scum. That's what the first animal came from. And we've been evolving ever since, so we are evolved pond scum. You have no purpose. It's totally random. It's naturalistic. It's blind. You're scum. You're worthless. You don't have any purpose in life. That's evolutionist faith. Christian's faith, we believe in the seemingly impossible, that is, to mortal man, but at the hands and the will of an all-powerful, loving, eternal Creator who has a purpose for His creation. He has revealed Himself to His creation by the things He has made and by divine inspiration. What a contrast. Just think about this contrast. Blind, purposeless evolution with nothing to guide it versus an all-seeing and all-powerful Creator, loving Creator who has a purpose for us and a purpose for all His creation. Quite a contrast. Okay, last time we talked about irreducible complexity, and I wanted to hit on one other aspect of irreducible complexity. You remember, irreducible complexity means that an organism or a system exists, and it is reduced to its irreducible essence. So if you took one part out of it, it would cease to function. It's irreducibly complex. In other words, taking it from the opposite direction, if something evolved, it got more and more complex, it would be non-functional until all of the pieces were together. And then it could function. And if you took one of those pieces out, it would cease to function. So that is the irreducible complexity point. So that's how this is not in dispute. This is just fact that there is irreducible complexity in nature. Well, let's talk about the eye. The eye is incredibly complex. It is staggeringly complex. And I hope you'll have a better appreciation for the eye after we get done. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but I just want you to appreciate what God has created. Just think about the aiming. I mean, I can move my eyes over there or over there or up or down. Fast automatic aiming and focusing. I can focus right here, or I can focus 100 feet away or 100 yards away. Quickly, automatic. It's fast. I don't think about it. You just do it. That's the eye. Automatic aperture adjustment. That is allowing different amounts of light in. And that's quick also. You're in the dark and you go out into the sun. Yes, it's bright and it hurts your eyes momentarily, but your eyes adjust. Or you're in the bright sun and you go into the dark. It takes a while, it takes a moment for your eyes to adjust, but they adjust to the darker setting. Aperture adjustment. Fast automatic aiming and focusing. Just think about that. And just think about what you can see. You can discern millions of colors with the eye, with your eye. And another thing that I like to think about when I think about the eye is not just the eye itself, but how the eye works with the rest of the body. We call it hand-eye coordination, like a baseball player who swings at a ball that's coming at him at 100 miles an hour, and he can hit it because he sees it and he swings at the right place, and he can hit the ball. Or all the other things that we do with not only hand-eye coordination, but the rest of the body based on what we can see. This is the entire body working together based on what we can see, and it going through the brain and the brain controlling everything. Amazing. Very complex and just an amazing part of God's creation. On page 57 of the Unraveling Evolution book, there are 10 steps listed, but these are only a few of the basic biochemical reactions that must take place in the eye. Of course, I don't understand all the science behind it. It's just everything I learn about it amazes me more and more. How God is just something we take for granted. A sight. We wake up, we open our eyes, we can see, we do whatever we have to do based on that. But the eye is useless unless fully developed. So it is irreducibly complex. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But this is what Joshua Gertler says in the book on page 57. This is him speaking. Speaking of the eye, he says, "It is inconceivable that the evolution of this biological system occurred over millions of years until finally the last piece was added to the puzzle and poof, sight appeared. Non-functional and useless eyes existing on animals for millions of years? Who can believe it?" It's a beautiful way of putting it. That it was evolving and it was getting closer and closer to being an eye, to being a complete and useful eye, but it was doing nothing for all those millions of years. What was the purpose? Where was it going? How did it know to go there? What was driving this evolution? But that last piece to the puzzle was added, and boom, you could see. Who can believe it? Charles Darwin. Remember, we pointed this out recently, that he said, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organism existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, which is what his theory calls for, then my theory would absolutely break down. I think the eye gets very close to answering that challenge. But another fact of the eye that makes it even tougher on evolutionists is the fact that the eye had to evolve numerous times. Not just in people, but something, according to Frank Salisbury, even something as complex as the eye has appeared several times. For example, in the squid, the vertebrates, and arthropods. It's bad enough accounting for the origin of such things once, but the thought of producing them several times, according to the modern synthetic theory, that is Darwinian evolution, makes my head swim. In other words, he can't wrap his arms around how in the world could it have happened one time, much less multiple times in the different types of animals. But it did happen. That's all that matters. How it happened is beside the point. David Darling said, although the eyes of the octopus and of other cephalopods and the eyes of vertebrates have evolved entirely independently, that is, remember we talked about the octopus last week? We didn't talk about his eye, but the eye of the octopus and the eye of humans are very similar. Each has a retina, a cornea, an iris, a lens, and a fluid-filled interior. These similarities of structure, despite different origins, provide a classic example of biological convergence. In other words, that's just a fancy name for, it's just coincidence. They have no like origin. They did not evolve from the same origin, but they did evolve, but they evolved totally independently of each other. Don't know how it happened, but they ended up looking almost exactly alike. It's biological convergence, they say. I think Johann Sturmius put it very well when he said, the examination of the eye is a cure for atheism. When you look at the eye and you examine it, and this he said, 300 years ago. But now we know a whole lot more about the eye than he did. And it's even more amazing and more complex than we even imagined, than he could have imagined. Psalm 94, verse 9 says, he who planted the ear, shall he not hear? He who formed the eye, shall he not see? Genesis 1, verse 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Proverbs 20, verse 12, the hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them. Psalm 139, verse 13 and 14, you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14. All right, I want to briefly talk about radiometric dating. That is part of this chapter 6 that we're in Unraveling Evolution. Just very briefly, how to date a rock, or how to judge the age of something found in nature, how to date a rock. The most common techniques for radiometric dating are the potassium-argon method, uranium-lead method, and radiocarbon dating, or carbon-14. This is the one that we think of most often, or that people talk about most often, but it has its limitations. Carbon-14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. That is, if you start with all carbon-14, after 5,730 years, half of it is gone. Okay, and then another half-life that goes from there, 5,730 years, half of it's gone again. Now it's down to 1/4 of its original amount, and continues to go on until about 62,000 years at the outside, at the maximum. All of it would be gone. So if you find carbon-14 in anything, that tells you that it has to be less than 62,000 years old. Well, no coal has ever been found that is completely void of carbon-14. In other words, if you test coal for carbon-14, you're going to find carbon-14 in the coal. Well, that's a problem because coal is supposedly hundreds of millions of years old. How could that have happened? But an even better example, I think, is diamonds. Diamonds contain carbon-14. All diamonds contain carbon-14. Well, how is that true when diamonds are supposedly over 1 billion years old and possibly up to 3 billion years old, according to evolutionists? Well, their answer sometimes is, well, it could have been contaminated. There could be leaching. In other words, the carbon-14 somehow leached into the diamond. But that won't work because diamonds are the hardest substance known to man. It could not have happened. That is, once again, their explanation for it. But if they would be objective, they would realize that there's no explanation for this except for the fact that it has to be less than 62,000 years old. Let the dating method guide you to how old the rock is, or the diamond, or the coal, or whatever the fossil, or whatever you're testing. All right, so with that we will close our lesson, and next lesson we completed lesson 6 in the book. Our next lesson we want to continue with our defeating neo-Darwinian dogmas, and that is, we're going to try to cover lessons 7 and 8 in one lesson. I know that's a lot of material, and I don't expect you to read all the lessons and answer every question. Just do what you can. Read as much as you can. I know school has started too, and that takes a lot of your time as well. So just do what you can to prepare for our next class on Wednesday night. And with that, we will close, and I thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again Wednesday night, God willing, and the Lord be with you all until then.